The first wave hit like a black wall. Morning traffic on the Haramain road braked all at once, horns swallowed by a roar that rose from the storm drains, and low lots as if the earth had overturned a bucket. Drivers who had crept through rain since dawn watched a muddy surge climb across the asphalt, lift cars by their doors, and carry them sideways into each other. A sedan spun, two wheels up, glass shattering as it struck the median. In the rearview mirror of a delivery truck, the driver saw a man in a white thobe yank open a back door to pull a child free. The water took them both off their feet. The air smelled like oil, wet concrete, and broken sewers. Wind pushed sheets of rain across half-built blocks. Jeddah had flooded before, but not like this. It was November 25th, 2009, the first day of the Eid al-Adha holiday and the height of the Hajj season nearby. A slow-moving storm stalled over the city and the hills behind it, dumping more rain in a few hours than Jeddah usually saw in an entire year. The water came down the wadis, the dry riverbeds that cut through the eastern suburbs, and hit a city that had spread over them with roads, cinder-block homes, warehouses, and walled compounds. Culverts that should have been open were clogged with rubble or narrowed by construction. Drainage channels dead-ended behind new walls. The flood followed the old paths it had always taken, only now those paths were lined with people. On Al-Harbi Street, shopkeepers lifted shutters too late and tried to push water back with brooms as it came under the doors. In Al-Samr and Quaiza, neighbors linked arms to cross intersections where the road disappeared into chocolate-colored currents. The underpasses turned into dark wells. In the King Abdullah Tunnel, cars stacked like toys, hoods against roofs, headlamps glowing under brown water until the batteries died. A school bus filled one window at a time, while men pounded on the glass and tried to force the center door. A family climbed a staircase to a rooftop and watched satellite dishes slide off neighboring buildings and vanish. Across the city, phone lines jammed and then failed. The new expressway became a channel, not a road. On the far side of the airport, pilgrims trying to reach Makkah sat on luggage in flooded lots and followed security guards to higher ground. The city had grown fast, out then up, and in the rush, the old storm paths had been treated like empty space that could be paved and parceled. That morning turned the map into a memory test. The rain simply reminded Jeddah where its rivers already were. Rumors moved faster than official updates. People said a dam had burst in the eastern hills. Others said a construction berm had broken or a diversion channel had failed. What was certain was the speed. In neighborhood after neighborhood, the water arrived in minutes and rose past the knee, the waist, the chest. Drivers climbed onto roofs of their vehicles and shouted for help. Some tried to swim across parking lots that had become brown lakes, slowed by spilled tires, floating crates, and the unseen pull of drainage pits. A young man tied a line around his waist and waded from balcony to bring two elderly neighbors to a stairwell. Another waded back into a street to free a seatbelt, then vanished in the foam. By midday, the storm slackened and left chaos. Mud-coated storefronts. Side streets were filled with stalled cars and refrigerator doors. Families who had fled returned to apartments that smelled of diesel and sewage, their tile floors covered with silt. At the big hospitals, emergency rooms were packed. Hypothermia, lacerations, broken limbs from falls off walls and cars. In the morgue, workers laid out bodies brought from the underpasses and roadside channels. The official toll began low and climbed by the hour. By the end of the week, authorities counted well over 100 dead and hundreds injured, with lists of missing that pushed the human cost into the hundreds before they were pared down by reunions and confirmations. Everywhere, the pattern was the same. Neighborhoods built across natural drainage filled first and fastest. Where channels had been narrowed, the flow accelerated and scoured, lifting pavement and peeling away shoulders. Behind developments that had walled off low ground for parking or storage, the water had ponded and then broken through with sudden force. In places where drainage pipes did exist, their mouths were buried under sand, plastic, and construction debris. The system failed the city not because the storm was impossible, but because the city had outgrown the system and choked it. By evening, the government declared a state of emergency. Soldiers and civil defense teams fanned out with trucks, ropes, and inflatable boats. Helicopters hovered over rooftops to winch people out of courtyards where the water had settled and held. Bulldozers pushed stranded vehicles into piles so ambulances could pass. Volunteers set up tables of bottled water and dates in school courtyards and mosques and hauled wet mattresses out to dry. On television, anchors in soaked jackets stood beside underpasses that still looked like lakes and read out street names where rescue teams were needed most. Then came the accounting. King Abdullah ordered an investigation, and suddenly, the word on the street, Tatawur Gair Muratab, unplanned development, moved from whispers to official language. A commission mapped where neighborhoods had sprawled across wadis and asked who approved the permits. They traced blocked culverts to the buildings that sat on top of them. They studied how a city of more than 3 million could reach 2009 with a stormwater network that looked like a patchwork of half-finished promises. Officials were suspended, some were charged. The press, usually cautious, printed diagrams of the city's hidden rivers as if revealing a crime scene. Engineers stepped into the mud with clipboards and tried to turn lessons into lines on paper. They proposed widening channels, reopening culverts, and building retention basins in the hills east of the ring road to slow the next storm. They marked the worst underpasses for redesign. They recommended simple work: clean the mouths of drains, clear the trash from channels, enforce the maps that showed where water had the right-of-way long before people did. The proposals landed alongside photographs of families huddled on roofs and rows of cars with silt lines up to their windows. For months after, Jeddah wore the flood like a stain that wouldn't wash out. You could drive past intersections where the asphalt still showed a ripped edge and imagine the river that had crossed it. In apartments where the water had reached above the couch cushions, the tile looked clean, but the baseboards were new and the bottom drawers of dressers stuck from swelling and drying. In offices, managers kept lists of employees lost. Shops restocked and reopened. All along the eastern neighborhoods, men worked at night under lamps to pull mud from pits and repaint walls, while trucks hauled away brown, waterlogged piles that used to be living rooms. The families of the dead did not need engineering drawings to understand what had happened. They had run, or waited, or held on. They could point to the place where the water turned. They could count the minutes it took for the stairwell to fill. They could name the spot on the road where a current pinned a door shut. They remembered the smell and the noise, the low, rumbling scrape of floating cars grinding together, the slap of water against a cinder block wall, the sudden quiet after the rain stopped and the city listened to itself drain. The next winter brought more rain. Not as fierce, not as fast, but enough to test the promises. New excavators worked in the wadis, and trucks loaded with concrete blocks lined up along cut banks where channels were being widened. Some neighborhoods still flooded, though not as deep. Work takes time in a city that spread so far so quickly. Time is the one thing a flash flood does not give. The lesson of that day was plain and brutal. A city had paved its memory. It had forgotten where water goes, and then it had tried to tell the water it was wrong. The storm did not listen. It traced the old lines, found the new obstructions, and forced its way through. In the weeks that followed, every meeting and map boiled down to one demand: put the city back into conversation with the land it sits on. Leave the wadis room. Keep the channels open. Build for the storms you might get, not the ones you hope for. When people in Jeddah talk about the flood now, They do what survivors always do. They anchor the story to a corner, a bridge, a storefront. Here, they say, and touch a wall where the paint is a different shade. Here, they say, and point to a lane that was a river. In those small markers, the whole morning lives again. The sky gone gray with rain, the blank surprise on faces when water rose past the knees, the flash of a car door as someone reached inside for a hand, and the weight of silence after the current passed and left what it wanted to leave. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.